very happy to be here, and I'm very grateful to the board and to the conference committee for giving me the opportunity to present this paper. Those of you who heard me speak in the conference at New Orleans in 2023 remember the overview I gave of my textual analysis of Venus and Adonis that I fully present in the first volume of my book, Shakespeare Discoveries. In my brief analysis, I show, in brief, my analysis shows that the poem is by Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, that it brought poetic closure to an intense artistic, personal, and political animosity and rivalry he had long endured with the poet, courtier, diplomat, and military officer Sir Philip Sidney, and that Oxford personified Sidney as Adonis and himself as Venus. Today, I'm going to present the major findings in the second volume of my Shakespeare Discoveries. And I'm launching this book, which will be available for purchase today and tomorrow. This book contains my full textual analysis of the Tempest. Now, also I want to mention that each book contains a complete and meticulous transcription of the first printings of these works. The Venus and Adonis, the 1593 pamphlet, that's the one copy that exists of it that is in the Bodleian Library, and the Tempest from the 1623 catalogue. Now, I've examined a lot of different catalogs, and there's no variation in the 1623 versions that I've examined. They're all the same. So so each of these contains this transcription. It's meticulously transcribed with attention paid even to the spacing of punctuation, allowing only for the obvious adjustment of the letters U, V, and capital J, which they are clearly now used for V, U, and capital I. I'm sorry, U, V, and capital I for V, U, and capital J. All right. So I have about 35 minutes to present an overview of this book, and so as to leave 5 minutes for questions, which I didn't do last year, and so I want to do this year. There are three major discoveries I will discuss and then take questions. The first discovery concerns the dating of the Tempest, and more generally, the dating of all of the comedies. For over 2 centuries, the Tempest has generally been placed last, or among the last, of the comedies in the order of their composition. My research corrects this long-standing error and places it first. I also find the tragedies to be in correct chronological order in the first catalog. The histories, of course, are in the orders of the kings that they are about. So that's anybody's guess as to what order those were written in. Ben Jonson, who had a great deal to do with the editing of the catalog and who wrote the frontispiece, as well as the memorial tribute, because he had the right to do it, brought the chronological ordering of the plays to the Shakespeare 1623 catalog over from his own practice in the 1616 catalog of his own works. He put them in the order in which they were written and first performed. On the other hand, in the late 18th century, and ever since, scholars have tended to agree with Edmund Malone, shown in this portrait by Joshua Reynolds, that the comedies and tragedies in the Shakespeare catalog were not set out in the order in which they were written and first performed. In 1778, Malone published an attempt to ascertain the order in which the plays attributed to Shakespeare were written. Acceptance of Malone's projections has largely persisted ever since. My analysis concludes that the compilers of the 1623 catalog did their best to arrange the comedies according to the timeline of their creation and production, and that this ordering should never have been questioned. A hint that the comedies were printed in the order in which they were written comes from Francis Mears in his 1598 work, Pilatus Tamia. He cites 6 Shakespeare comedies, one being Love's Labour's One, which is not extant, or at least not under that name. The 5 extant comedies he listed are in the same order as in the catalog: Gentleman of Verona, Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice. The natural conclusion to be drawn is that both Mears and the catalog were following what they believed was chronological order. Even in the generally accepted sequence, just over half of the comedies, shown in this slide, 8 out of the 14, those in boldface, are in chronological order, according to current scholarship. Of the 6 out of sequence, the traditional order of 2, Much Ado About Nothing, and Twelfth Night is not far off. The biggest exception, of course, is, and the biggest mistake of the traditional dating, is the Tempest. I first published these findings in the Brooklyn Rail, by the way, over 10 years ago. Textual evidence in the play, though, in The Tempest, suggests that as the earliest comedy, The Tempest can be dated to 1579, and that is written for the wedding of Ferdinando Stanley, Lord Strange, and Alice Spencer. These are not wedding pictures. The bride and groom were the same age, 20. Ferdinando Stanley's portrait shows him at 35, the age when he died. Alice Spencer lived to be 77. On first mention in the play, in a stage direction in Act 1, Scene 1, Ferdinando is the name of the Prince of Naples who was bowled over by Miranda. Here's a close-up to show of his name in the first mention. After that, he becomes Ferdinand throughout the rest of the play. But reference to Ferdinando Stanley Lord Strange is not limited to his given name in that one in stage direction. His title name, Strange, and forms of it are used 29 times in The Tempest. 5 times, the word strange itself is directly spoken 18 times, 5 times in the last scene alone. And there are other forms, stranger, strangeness, strangely, as well as names strange in stage directions. It brings it up to 29. I'll just run through a few here. Strange accident, rich and strange fish, strange drowsiness, strange repose, strange humming, strange fish too, strange beast, strange bedfellows, observation strange, strange stare, strange passion, strange stuff, strange story, from strange to stranger. That's in the last scene. And strange noises, strange maze, and strange thing. Did I miss strange? Strange maze, strange thing. Now we also have 2 forms of stranger, and the 2 forms of strangeness, and we have 4 strangely. Okay. Then we have the stage directions. There's 2 in this one, and 1 here. Okay. So that's 29 times we get strange. No other play, by the way, has that many. The closest one to come to it is Cymbeline, and Cymbeline has 24 mentions of strange, and nothing else comes even close to that. I would say it's down below half of what's in the Tempest for other plays. But the idea that it's that many times in Cymbeline leads me to suspect that this was also performed for performance at the court of Lord Strange. And it's, the last play in the catalogue. It was probably stuck in at the last minute. It probably should have been one of the very earliest plays in the catalogue. But I need to do research on that further. Okay. There is more evidence in the play to link it to the 1579 wedding of Lord Strange and Alice Spencer, but you'll have to read that in my book because I have to move on to the next discovery. But this is related to the dating also, and that is, in a word, Bermoothes. Rectifying the date of the Tempest to 1579 by itself rules out Bermuda as the meaning of Bermoothes, because England had scant knowledge of the Bermudas until 1609, just like Theobald said and Malone repeated. So the playwright could have hardly been trying to convey Bermudas with Bermoothes, and a 1579 audience would not have understood it as such. A review of the original, a review of the origin and establishment of the orthodox identification of Bermoothes with Bermudas demonstrates how a mistake can snowball, and is fully shown in my book. But here I will run through it quickly. Two earliest printings of the Shakespeare works left Bermoothes unglossed. Nicholas Rowe, 1709, the first printing, unglossed. Alexander Pope, second printing in 1725, reprinted in 1728, unglossed. First Shakespeare reprinter to attempt an explanation of Bermoothes, as I mentioned, was Louis Theobald, third reprinter of the works. Theobald declared that Bermoothes was a misprint for Bermudas. Now, how do you get a misprint like OOTHES coming in for UDAS? It's not a misprint, and there's no basis in the fact of what he says. And he does date this thing to 1609. Now, what happens from that foot when he publishes his next edition, he just does what the good editor would do, changes Bermoothes to Bermudas. Now, the rest of the successors of the reprinters of the Shakespeare works had to contend with this, and they went crazy with it. Hanmer was the next one. Hanmer says that Bermoothes is a typographical error, not a typographical error, but a mispronunciation of the Spanish Bermudas. Now, Bermuda in Spanish is Bermuda. How do you pronounce it Bermoothes? No way. All right, and he also plops in some other research to later dates, 1614, which is ridiculous. But the late date Tempest theory was born and reinforced. Pope in 1744 quoted Hanmer's footnote without credit. Warburton, Pope died in 1744, and Warburton took over, and there's the Warburton Pope edition of the Bermoothes, and Warburton extended the note even further with more absurdities, followed by Johnson. Then Johnson's Bermoothes footnote gets even longer, and Johnson-Stevens comes along, and then you really get a lot of footnote for Bermoothes, in which there's a curious thing. that George Stevens comes up with this theory that Bermudas, not Bermuthes, Bermudas, refers to a bedeviled group of not to a bedeviled group of tempest-racked islands across the Atlantic at all, but rather to a disreputable London neighborhood. Stevens' subtle discovery was ignored by Edmund Malone, who weighed in the same edition with his attempt to ascertain the order in which the plays of Shakespeare were written. And he, let's see, what did he do? There we go. And he dates the Tempest 1712. He refers to the 1609 shipwreck again. Okay, which goes back to Tybalt. Everybody had kind of ignored that ever since. All right, so in summary, the Bermudas theory of Bermudas evolved from Theobald's wrong guess that it was a typo to an absolutely wrong assertion with piles of irrelevant evidence in the span of 46 years, a cautionary tale for academics to ponder. So if Bermuthes is not Bermudas, what is it? Let's go back to Ariel's statement. Safely in harbor is the king's ship, in the deep nook where once thou calledst me up at midnight to fetch dew. The statement could have ended there, and the meaning would never have been questioned. Ariel recounts Prospero calling him up at midnight to fetch dew from somewhere in the deep nook. But the sentence does not end there, as it continues with, from the still vexed Bermuthes, there she's hid. Bermuthes has been interpreted as referring to a place in Bermuda. Prospero and Ariel are on an island somewhere along a sea route between Tunis and Naples, the route along which King Alonso's fleet was traveling. Bermuda is very far away from the world of the play. If Prospero wanted Ariel to go to the Bermudas to fetch dew, why would he summon him to the nook to tell him to go get it when he could simply tell him to go get it there? And why suddenly get this idea at midnight? Prospero chose this particular moment because midnight is an opportune moment for dew to be available in the nook. Prospero saw the dew he wanted right there in the nook, ready to be gathered, and midnight was the ripe time for gathering it. Dew is found in Shakespeare works in no less than 22 plays, as well as in Venus and Adonis and Lucrece. In many instances, it is used metaphorically, such as in Coriolanus. He watered his new plants with dews of flattery. It has a refreshing quality in Titus Andronicus. As fresh as morning's dew distilled on flowers in Act 2. And in Cymbeline, it's funereal. The herbs that have on them cold dew of the night are strewings fitst for graves. In the Shakespeare works, there is no instance of dew having a particular value for being associated with a particular place. Shakespearean dew commonly formed on plants, on herbs, fruits, vegetables, and the leaves of grass, shrubs, bushes, and trees. Moisture in the air condenses into water droplets so that dew forms most prevalently on botanical surfaces. We do not even have to travel very far to find another alchemical use of dew in the Tempest. It's in the same scene where, after Ariel has recalled his experience, Caliban describes gathering of dew by his mother Sycorax. As wicked dew, as ere my mother brushed with raven's fen as ever my mother brushed with raven's feather from unwholesome fen, drop on you both. It's a curse on Prospero. Okay, there is a parallel phrasing in from unwholesome fen and from the still-vexed Bermoothes. Fen is a peaty wetland with groundwater where dew settles on a range of plants, unwholesome grasses, sedges, and mosses. Caliban's mother, Sycorax, used a raven's feather with inherently dark properties for her dew-gathering. In the 16th century, dew was associated in many instances with alchemical properties. In the History of Travail in the West and East Indies, published in 1577 by John Eden, a book well known for connection with the Tempest, we'll find this. But I also want to mention Bermuda has a few sentences devoted to it too, and nothing to do with dew. In Bermuda, Eden is most impressed by cormorants feeding on flying fish in the sea around it. But dew does come up elsewhere in Eden's History of Travail, and with quite a bit more detail in the context of observations by Pliny on bees and honey production. For then at the morning spring, the leaves of trees are found moist with a fat dew, insomuch that such as have been abroad under the firmament of at that time have their apparel anointed with liquor, and the hair of their head clammy. And whether this be the sweat of heaven, or as it were a certain spittle of the stars, either the juice of the air purging itself, I would it were pure, liquid, and simple of its own nature, as it first falleth from above, which is what Prospero is after, but now descending so far and infected not only with such unclean vapors and exhalations as it meeteth with by the way, but afterward also corrupted by the leaves of trees, herbs, and flowers of sundry tastes and qualities, and likewise as well in stomachs of the bees, for they vomit it at their mouths, as also by long reserving the same in hives, it nevertheless retaineth a great part of the heavenly nature, etc. Gathering dew is part of the practice of apothecaries. The chapter on the plant cistus in Book 6 of Henry Light's A New Herbal. Oh, I've gone too far. Let's see. Of Henry Light's New Herbal. Yes, this is it. Henry Light's New Herbal. It's a translation of Rembert Dodowen's Kruideboek, 1554, and it provides an example. Dodowen's, translated by Light, Henry Light, speaks of the fat dew or liquor which is gathered from cistus leaves to obtain ladanum. In the catalogue, Bermoothes is italicized. In the Tempest, there are three reasons for the use of italics. First, for personal names, like Sebastian Prospero. Second, for place names, like Naples and Tunis. And third, for unusual or foreign words, like zenith, drollery, coraggio. So, who in his right mind would call a spirit up at midnight to fetch dew from a remote place? Dew is where you find it, and Prospero had found it in the nook at midnight and called Ariel up to gather it. Okay. In the plant world, Bermoothes is cognate with Bermutis. Bermutis in Portuguese, the common Portuguese name for Acanthus hungaricus, or thistle, as it is called in the Shakespeare works. Thistle, however, is vexing more than vexed because of its sharp prickles. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Bottom tells Cobweb to kill me a red-hipped humblebee on the top of a thistle. Vexing properties of thistle are also depicted in Much Ado About Nothing and Henry V. There is, however, an even more likely foreign word that is cognate with Bermoothes. In German, the word is vermut, plural vermutes, which is phonetically rendered vermouth, vermutes in French, and vermut, vermutes in Spanish. In English, it's wormwood, the herb associated with absinthe and vermouth. Here is the Dutch scholar Dodoens, Violite, and Vermutes. He has quite a nice gloss on it. And Hieronymus Bach, Hieronymus Boch provided data on Vermutes in his Der Stirpium. Here, and those are, let's see, Hieronymus and his play pages. Okay. But the most likely reference source of the word for a 16th century nobleman would be the word in Vermutes, for Vermutes, in the New Herbal. William Turner's A New Herbal. Do I have it there? Is that William Turner? I think it might be. Okay. It's published from 1551 to 1562. The first plant listed, the first entry after the title page, and there's no introduction, is a 4-page prologue on wormwood. This is a book that noble families owned, and to a noble leafing through it for the first time, the opening entry is a 4-page entry on wormwood. Wormwood is specifically chosen for effect, a commonly known exotic herb, and as a source of absinthe, who knows how it was being used via back channels in the English Renaissance. The very beginning of the gloss on wormwood mentions vermouth. Let me get to that. There, okay. It mentions vermouth in Dutch. Okay. Now, the pronunciation of B for V is very common in plant names. B, here's an example in the Grand Herbier, another contemporary work of in Verbena, in early modern French. Verbena becomes Berbina in early modern French in the Grand Herbier. Note the similarity of B to V. In handwriting, the letter B resembles B in many instances of Elizabethan handwriting, as well as, and here we can see it in a book containing diverse sorts of hands. I'll give you 3 illustrations published in 1571. Here's one, here's 2. You notice how the B and V's are similar. These are different forms of Elizabethan handwriting. Okay. Now, the pronunciation of S, of ES as ESS, is mirrored in other spellings of words that end in that sound in the Tempest. Here we see strangeness, business, likeness. Also, wormwood is bitter. Wormwood, Hamlet says, expressing his bitterness. Wormwood's vexed properties are also used to good effect in Romeo and Juliet, Love's Labour's Lost, and Lucrece. The bitterness of wormwood is noted in the Bible. In the most important edition of the Shakespeare work, for the Shakespeare works, the Geneva Bible, has it in Revelations, chapter 8, verses 10 and 11. Then the third angel blew the trumpet, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning like a torch. And it fell into the third part of the rivers and into the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. Therefore the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. So to conclude that study of the Bermoothes, Ariel's report about the location of the king's ship cites the deep nook to which Prospero had called him to gather dew from wormwood plants, which were vexed either by dew or in themselves or both. And I realized in preparing this talk that I would not have fully time to elaborate on my third major discovery. In my textual analysis of the play, I find that there are passages that are obviously based on improvisations of some kind or some kind of creations by the actors. The evidence suggests that actors contributed to the script of The Tempest based on directions from the principal artist, presumably, and who devised the play. The sections the sections of scenes in which actors contribute have no plot devices in them. They're pure banter. And I'm referring here specifically to comic scenes, some of the banter between Trinculo, Stefano, and Caliban, and the kind of smart remarks that Sebastian and Antonio make to each other. But I will just say this. Everyone concerns themselves with the questions of who wrote the plays on a macro level. But there is a big story on the micro level. And this is a way of getting to the answer to the question that Ross Barber raised at the last conference, at the end of the conference, in which she challenged us to figure out what Shakespeare had to do with these things. Well, Shakespeare's name is the first name among the actors, and the actors were contributors. They still are today contributors to plays that they're in, if they're originating roles. And so and it would be logical for the master playwright to give them rein to go out and do stuff, because he needed some comedy in there too. And this is where I see Shakespeare. Now, in this play, I do actually suggest that he might have played the part of Caliban. Shakespeare would have been 15 years old when this play was written. And if he had played the part of Caliban, there are some little parts where he might have thrown in some improv. He might even have have had the skill to imitate iambic pentameter and write a couple of lines in iambic pentameter. But that's in the book, and you can check it all out. What I do want to do is point out one standout example of an actor in this play, who identify an actor in this play, the actor who first played the role of Ariel. This role requires a character actor who not only to portray the freedom of a spirit jester servant, but also a water nymph and a harpy. The actor who plays Ariel also has to possess special musical skills. Because of the misdating of the play to 1610-11, previous scholars had proposed that Robert Armin originated the role of Ariel. When the play is dated 1579, the first performer of the role appears to me to be Armin's mentor, Richard Tarleton. Tarleton was at the height of his career as a major star of the stage, age 49 in 1579 when Armin was 11. J.O. Hallowell writes of Tarleton that there exist nearly hundreds of contemporary witnesses who agree in asserting that his comic powers were unrivaled, and in their estimation, almost miraculous. One aspect of the musical talent for the role of Ariel is mastery of the tabor and pipe, on which Tarleton was an acknowledged virtuoso. Here is Tarleton depicted in 1592 by John Scotto to illustrate the letter T in his alphabet. A 1613 publication of Tarleton's Jests copied Scotto's design with somewhat less success. These images identify Tarleton with musical skills on the tabor and pipe. Of all the Shakespeare plays, The Tempest alone has a stage direction for a character to play tabor and pipe. Ariel plays the tune on a tabor and pipe. The musical skill of the performer of the role of Ariel on the tabor and pipe is complemented. I would I could see this taborer, Stefano says. He lays it on. In the context of the first performance, it has all the characteristics of an improvised line in response to a fantastic tabor and pipe performance. Ariel himself calls attention to his taboring. I beat my tabor, he says, and describes what an effect it created. The Tempest has two huge musical production numbers for which Ariel is the director and driving musical force. On stage in Act 3, Scene 3, the spirits dance in with a table and spread a feast before the king and his party. the second musical stage direction, and then they carry it off. And then the second musical stage direction in the scene, yes, given and the whole banquet disappears. It's a huge magical production number. An even bigger production number comes in Act 4, the big wedding celebration production number. Now come, my Ariel, Prospero commands, bring a corollary. It is the command of Oxford to Tarleton, who agreed to do this job and now finds it quite demanding. Ariel has to accompany 3 goddesses. Then the dance of the nymphs and reapers. And because dancers have to have music, Ariel himself makes reference to his presentational responsibilities in the Tempest. Tarleton had his own company, he mounted his own productions of his performance artworks, and Oxford made good use of his skills. In conclusion, Tarleton has his trademarks all over the role of Ariel. Okay, I think I've said all I have time for, and I will be happy to take your questions.
We're good? Go, ask. Here you go.
William, thank you very much. You went in one direction. I was surprised you didn't continue. There was an area of London called the Bermudes. I call it Bermudes. It could be Bermudes. Ben Jonson mentioned it 3 times in The Devil is an Ass. It was where you bought your liquor that was stilled. So couldn't we just read the line as dew meaning alcohol? Get me alcohol from the area of London, which is vexed by stills.
Well, I do go into this quite a bit in the book, actually. There are the Johnson lines, which that quotation from George Stevens references, and but this is in 1611, okay. So, it's up there it's at the later date of, and so I don't know whether it was. I don't think 30 years earlier it probably was called Bermuda, because they didn't know what Bermuda was. Bermuda doesn't really dawn. There's a little mention of it in John Eden's book, but it's really buried, and it's about cormorants. Okay, so anyway, I think we have in the earlier dating you don't get Bermudas. Bermudas, the 1609 George Summers book is the one that brought Bermudas into the consciousness of the English. Well, I don't think so, because why would it be if it was Bermuda? Nobody ever heard of Bermuda. No, it's not Bermoothes. It's not Bermoothes. It's never Bermoothes, okay? There's no Bermoothes in any literature anywhere until after 1611, okay? There's no mention of Bermoothes anywhere, and it only comes up, all right, I'll just quickly do this. Like in 1611 or 1612, 13, there's a play by Fletcher that mentions Bermoothes, but it's spelled with a U. So he heard Bermoothes in a play when it was presented, and it became a theatrical buzzword. There's 2 other references to Bermoothes in later plays that spell it correctly, but they were published after the 1623 catalog came out. So those people had the opportunity of reading the catalog and seeing Bermoothes there, and so it became a theatrical buzzword, and they used it. So that's where, but there's no Bermoothes anywhere prior to that. That Fletcher reference misspelled is the first mention of Bermoothes. Everything else, it's Bermuda. There's no Bermoothes.
William, we have a question back here.
Quick, I'm not sure if I completely agree with your theory, but have you checked into any of the research on, and others in the room would know this better than I do, but where the Earl of Oxford staged a sea battle in one of the, I know that's not the same scenario as the Tempest, but
right,
in the 15th century?
I recall that. Yeah, I recall that he did stage a sea battle in which there was a bunch of mishaps, and a bunch of things burned down. I don't think that was the production of the Tempest. I don't think so. I think the Tempest, all right, 1579, when he does it in for Lord Strange. Okay, that's okay. I'm running out of time, but I'll be glad to talk more about it.
One quick question.
Yeah.
In October 2023, Claire Davies in the De Vere Society newsletter, did you see her article
No.
about this? She confirms the association of vermouthies with wormwood
Oh.
on the island of Vulcano in the Aeolian Islands between Sicily and...
Oh.
And she posits that Caliban actually had a skin disease that needed treating. People used to go to those hot springs for treatment, and he was so dependent on, I mean, the idea is that Caliban, who had something called harlequin-type ichthyosis, which caused scaling and, a terrible skin disease, was depending on Prospero for treatment of his disease. You should look it up, but she also refers to wormwood. She also makes the same point you do, that the term Bermuda was nowhere to be found
Yeah.
in the
Bermuthes.
16th century.
Yeah, Bermuthes was never found in the,
Yeah,
in the
so-
16th century. Bermuda, there's a little mention in John Eaton in 1579, 1577, but nothing else that I know of. Maybe a few obscure mentions very buried in academic literature or intellectual literature, not like the book on 1609 that really made Bermuda blossom for the English.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.